So this is our last shiur before Chanukah. And my minhag is for all these years that when we approach Yemei Chag, Yemei Moed, special days, special times, then we dedicate the shiur to Inyona D'Yoyma. So this week's shiur and next week's shiur will deal with sugyas associated with Chanukah. It is interesting that the Rambam dedicated 2 prokim to Chanukah, and that is Perek Gimel and Perek Daled of Hilchos Megillah v'Chanukah. So the Rambam put together Purim and Chanukah. They have so much in common. Both are Yemei Zikaron, Yemei Chag, Midirabonon, Lezecher Nisim, Shenasu, Bizman Beis HaMikdash, Bizman Bayis Sheni. And the Rambam dedicated the first 2 prokim to Hilchos Megillah, Perek Gimel Daled is Chanukah. But what is especially interesting is Perek Gimel is all the halachas of Hallel, while Perek Daled is Hadlokas Haner. And it is interesting, if it would be up to me, and Baruch Hashem, it wasn't and it isn't up to me, if it would be up to me, I probably would put Hilchos Chanukah into Sefer Ahava of the Rambam, together with Hilchos Kriyas Shema, Hilchos Tefillah, and Hilchos Brachos, because after a Hallel is a form of Tefillah. It is Hallel, Hoidoya. So to me it would seem most natural to put the dinam of Hallel in Sefer Ahava, together with Kriyas Shema, Tefillah, and Brachos. But the Rambam decided differently, and the Rambam puts all the halachas of Hallel in Sefer Hazmanim in Hilchos Chanukah. And obviously, what this conveys is that the essence of Yemei Chanukah is Hallel. As we say in the Tefillah V'Anisim, V'kavu Shmoinis Yemei Chanukah Elu L'hoidos U'Lahallel. So today, in the mind and the attitude of every Jew, what is Chanukah about? Hadlokas Haner, Ner Chanukah, seems to be secondary. The essence of Chanukah, the neshama of Chanukah is Hallel. And that is why the Rambam not only put all the halachas of Hallel, well, Hallel is said not only Chanukah, Sholosh Regolim, we say Hallel, but all the halachas of Hallel are in Hilchos Chanukah. So obviously what this means is that the mahus, the essence of Chanukah is Hallel v'hoidoya. And an additional comment is the Rambam puts Dinei Hallel before Dinei Hadlokas Haner. Perek Gimel is Hallel, Perek Daled is Hadlokas Haner. So obviously, yes, the mitzvah, the practical mitzvah is Hadlokas Haner and Persum Nissa, but Hallel is no less important. It is the essence of Yemei Chanukah. So bearing in mind that we will have 2 shiurim on Chanukah this week and next week, this week we're going to discuss Hallel v'hoidoya, and next week I still didn't decide which sugya, but some sugya that is associated with the mitzvah of Hadlokas Haner and Persumei Nissa. In my Svorim, in a few different sources, I spoke at great length about the mitzvah of Hallel. It is in Minchas Osher and Devorim, once again Minchas Osher Chelik Beis Moyadim, and what I had to write about Hallel, I wrote Dafka in the section on Purim, not in the section of Chanukah, but today I want to discuss actually 2 different topics. Hallel v'hoidoya. 2 different topics that are somewhat associated, but not actually the same. Number 1, recently I was asked, not the first time, a question about Hilchos Hallel. If a person said Hallel, b'yomim shegoimrim es ha'Hallel, sometimes we say only a partial Hallel, and that is Chol Hamoed Pesach and Rosh Chodesh. But in those days in which we say the entire Hallel, and a person said Hallel and he skipped 1 word, was he Yotze or not? Does he need to repeat and say Hallel over again, or b'diavad he was Yotze? So the Mishnah Berurah Paskins Tov Pei Ches Sif Koten Beis, and further elaborates in Shar Tzion Sif Koten Beis and Sif Koten Gimel, that if you skipped 1 word, you were not Yotze. And the source of the Mishnah Berurah is Megillah Yud Zayin. The Gemara says, just in the Mishnah we learn Megillah Yud Zayin Amid Aleph HaKodesh HaMegillah LeMafreya Lo Yotzo. if a person reads the Megillah not in the right sequence. He reads a later pasuk before he reads the earlier one, Lo yotzi yedecha v'osai. You need to read the Megillah kefi haseder. And the Gemara says, V'chein b'Hallel. Hallel has the same rule. So the Mishnah Berurah says, so Hallel and Megillah have the same halachas. And just like a Megillah Esther, if you skipped one word, you weren't Yaitze. The same applies to Hallel. And for many years, this Mishnah Berurah is a tema b'yeinai, and ketalmid kotten hadan lefnei rabbosav hagadolim b'karka, to me, seems differently. And I think if a person skips a word in Hallel, he was Yotzi Yedei Chayvosai. Who am I even to doubt the Mishnah Berurah? The Mishnah Berurah is the most significant Sefer Halacha, probably in the past 100 years or so, or maybe even more than that. So, Torehi, V'lilmed ani tzorech. And as I will mention towards the second half of today's Shir, so let me share with you what I think about this question. So the Mishnah Berurah clearly says, you skipped one word, you weren't Yotzi Yedei Chayva, and you need to say Hallel again. And all Sifrei Halikut v'Apsak of our generation, they all bring the Mishnah Berurah as Halacha Psuka. One of the excellent Svarim on Hilchas Tefillah is Ishei Yisrael. And Ishei Yisrael, I think it's Perek Mem Aleph Sif Lamed Aled Ha'ora Ayin Gimel, quotes the Mishnah Berurah, and he quotes no other opinion, and he writes, if you said Hallel, B'yomim Shegoyim L'Masad, he skipped one word, you need to repeat, say Hallel again, with a bracha. And to me, I don't think so. So let me explain my feeling and my opinion. First of all, I think it's Muchach Lahedi in the Torah. If you skipped a word, you were Yaitze. So the Torah brings this discussion twice. Tov Peches in Hilchas Pesach, Tov Reish Mem Daled in Hilchas Sukkah. So Pesach and Sukkah we say Hallel. First day Pesach Goymerem is Hallel. Sukkah every day we say Hallel Sholem. And the Torah brings a machlokes between the Rosh and Rabbeinu Maram Rotenburg. So the Torah paskins Yomem Shegoymerem is Hallel. We say Hashekadisholo B'Msois Vetzionu. Ligmoire Sahallel. The Maram Rotenburg, the Maram Rotenburg says no, we should never say Ligmoire Sahallel, because if you say Ligmoire Sahallel, ve'im chiser ois achas o teva achas have a brocha levatole. If you say Ligmoire Sahallel, then you need to finish the entire Hallel, and that is why if you say Ligmoire Sahallel and skip the word, it's a brocha levatole, and therefore we always say Likroi es HaHalel. The Rosh says, even if you say Ligmar, it doesn't matter. The Brucha doesn't alter, doesn't change the halachas. Ligmar es HaHalel means you need to say the entire Hallel, but it doesn't mean that if you skipped a word or a letter, you weren't Yaitze. The Shulchan Aruch paskins in accordance to the Torah, Tov Reish Mem Daled, Ligmar es HaHalel. The Ramot of Peches paskins, like Maram Rotenburg. No, we always say Likrois. The nusach we say is Likro es HaHalel. So to me it seems clear as daylight. Me'ikar din Hallel, if you skip the word, you're Yaitze. The entire argument between the Rosh and Maram Rotenburg is, does that halacha change if you say Ligmoire es HaHalel? According to Maram Rotenburg, it does. Because if you say Ligmoire es HaHalel, then you need to be Goymer. And that is why one should not say Ligmor, because it is very common that you skip a word or even a letter, and we don't want to get into a situation in which you need to say the Hallel again, and that's why one should not say Ligmor es Hallel. There are more paskins, and that is the opinion of the Tur and the Rosh. Even if you say Ligmor es Hallel, it doesn't change the din, and Ligmor es Hallel doesn't necessarily mean that you need to say the entirety of Hallel and not skip anything. So this proves clearly that if you skip a word, you don't have to repeat the Hallel. The Mishnah Berurah, Sharatzin Sivkot and Gimel, Tov Peches, that I quoted before, does bring the Tur. He doesn't speak at length, but he does bring the Loshen of Maram Rotenburg as quoted in the Tur. And I think the Shatzian wants to explain L'shitosai. His psak is if you skip the word, you need to repeat the Hallel. Doesn't matter what the Nusach HaBrocha is, whether you say Likros Hallel or Ligmanis Hallel. So his pshat, the Maram Rotenberg, is if you say Ligmanis Hallel and you didn't properly pronounce one of the words, Lo Alfi Digduk, then if you say Ligmar, it's a Brocha Levatola. If you say Likro, it's not a Brocha Levatola. But that doesn't fit in with the Loshen of the Tur. The Tur Kosav b'mefurash. If you say Ligmar Saharal, im chiser os achas o teva achas, brochos oy levatola, im chiser. Chiser doesn't mean lo dig ba'oisi oiseo. Chiser means if you skipped. And therefore, mavur lahedye betur. Both opinions in Tur, both the Maram Rotenberg and the Rosh. If you skip a word in Hallel, you were yoitze yedei choiva. I also think it's quite obvious in the Mogan Avraham. The Mogan Avraham is Semetov base when the Mechaber brings HaKodesh HaHallel Mafreya Lo Yotzo. And then I'm right. Ve'im Torah, Choyze L'mokom Sheto, Ve'goymer Adasoif. And the Mishnah Berurah Sivkot Yud explains very pushet HaKodesh Mafreya Lo Yotzo. So the Mishnah Berurah writes, not the Mishnah Berurah, the Mogan Avraham Sivkot Yud. He explains that Im Torah, V'dileg posuk. You can't just insert that posuk wherever you're standing. You need to go back to that posuk, and from there, ad asoif. Otherwise, it is koilel mafreya shalo yotzi lech levosai. And I ask, why does the Mogan Avraham say im dileg posuk? Why doesn't he say if we skip the word? If it's the same. This proves once again, no, if you skip a word, you don't need to say again Hallel. But if you skipped an entire posuk, then you skipped Shevach, you skipped Hallel, you skipped Hoidoya, and you need to say it again. But if you skip one word, and it doesn't really alter or change the meaning, and it doesn't diminish the Hallel, the Hoidoya, the praise, then that is why the Mogan Avraham says, Im dilik posuk, and he doesn't say Im chiser. So this is a hargosh in the Mogan Avraham, but my raya is primarily the Tur. What is fundamentally the question? What is the question? Let me explain this. It's a certain paradox. On one hand, Kriya Shema Mikra Megillah. If you skip a word, you weren't Yotze, and you need to re-say Kriya Shema and re-say Mikra Megillah. Minchas Osha and Purim, I wrote about Kriyas Parsha Zohar, and I quoted Reb Shlomo Zalman. Reb Shlomo Zalman says, if you didn't hear the entire Kriya, but if you heard the essence of the Kriya, and the word you skipped is not essential, then you're Yotze. And my opinion is differently. I think Kriyas Zohar is like Kriyas Shema, it is like Kriyas Megillah. Skipped one word, you weren't Yotze. But on the other hand, Tefillah Berachos Hamazon, if you skip the word, of course you were Yotze. As long as you're not Mishalem and Medbeir Shetov Chachom Brochos. If the Siyam of Brocha is proper, and the essence of the Brocha you said, skip a word you don't have to say again. So what is the difference between Megillah and Kriyas Shema on one hand, Tefillah Berachos Hamazon on the other? Let me share with you my understanding. There's a difference between Kriyas Shema. The mitzvah of Kriyas Shema, number one, is Kriya. And what do we need to read? Parsha Mesuyemes in Torah, whether it's Parsha Rishoyna, Parsha Shniya, or Gimel Parshas. But it is clearly defined. What is the mitzvah? Lekro Parshas Shema. The same with Mikra Megillah. Kriya Shema D'Oraisa, Megillah D'Rabbanan. But essentially it's the same. Number one, the mitzvah is Kriya. And what are we supposed to read? Clearly defined, the Megillas Esther. And that is why I think Parsha Zohar is the same. The mitzvah is Kriya. And what do we need to read? Parsha Samolek at the end of Parsha Ki. So this is the Tzad Shava between the three. The mitzvah is reading Likroi Parsha Misuyemes. That is clearly defined. What is Miyuchad? What is the essence of this Parsha? Tefillah and Berachos Hamazon are different. The mitzvah of Tefillah is lehispalel. The mitzvah of Berachos Hamazon is Levorech es HaKadosh Baruch Hu al Hamazon. It's not Kriya Ba'alma. It is Tefillah, it is Bracha. What is the formula? Anshe Knesses HaGdolah were metaken. Nusach HaTefillah, Nusach Berachas Hamazon. It's not fixed. It's not clearly defined. The mitzvah is to bench. The mitzvah is to daven. So even though Anshe Knesses HaGdolah were Menasech, they formulate Nusach HaTefillah, Nusach Berachas Hamazon, but words aren't ma'akev. Only the essence is ma'akev. And I think that is the difference between the mitzvah of Kriyas Parsha Mesuyemes. If you left out one word, you didn't read the Parsha. Tefillah and Berachas Hamazon are different. It is not Kriya. It is more than Kriya. It is more profound than Kriya. It is Lahoidis Ulahallel. It is not Lahoidis Ulahallel, but Lehispalel and Levorach al Hamazon. So even though Chazal did formulate a nusach, but words aren't ma'akev. And this brings us to a fundamental question. Is Hallel more similar to Kriyas Shema, Mikra Megillah, Parasha Zohar, or is Hallel more similar to Tefillah and to Berachas Hamazon? On one hand, the Nusach HaBaruch is Likroyas HaHallel, but it is clear that the essence of the mitzvah is not Kriya. The essence of the mitzvah is Hallel v'hoidoya, to thank and express gratitude to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. What is the Nusach? So instead of Chazal coming along and being metaken and formulating a Nusach, for some reason Chazal said, we don't need a new Nusach. These are the Pirkei Tehillim that essentially are Tehillas Hashem. Those are the ones with which you're Makayim the mitzvah of Hallel. So on one hand, it is a clearly defined Parsha, or Parshiyos in Sefer Tehillim. And that would be similar to Kriyas Shema, Parsha Zohar, Kriyas Megillah. But my opinion is no, it's not similar to them. The Nusach HaBaruch might be Lekroyas HaHallel, but the essence of the mitzvah is Lahoidois u'Lahallel. Like Tefillah is Lehispalel, Berachas Hamazon, Levorech es HaKadosh Baruch Hu al Hamazon, Lahoidois u'Lahallel b'simchas HaChag, or Keshenasu Nisim LiYisrael. And the text is also not, it wasn't born as Hallel, it was born as Tehillim. And therefore, in my opinion, when Anshe Knesset Gedolah say you need to say these Pirkei Hallel Shebetehillim, it is as if they were metaken anusach, and words are not ma'akev. Kach ner la'anius daiti. So we proved our argument from the Tur, Remez in the Magen Avraham, but I did try to explain what was the Mishnah Berurah's hashkafa in his psak and why I would think differently. According to the Mishnah Berurah, obviously Hallel is similar to Kriyas Shema, to Mikra Megillah. We need to read the Hallel. And it is not a new formula, but Parsha Shebetehillim. What's the difference between Parsha Shebetehillim and Psukei Parshiyos HaTehillim? But I think it is different. It is different. Because the mitzvah of Hallel is Lahoidus and Hallel. The Tehillim is just a formula, and it's a formula that was nitkan in later generations. Kriyas Shema, B'shah Nitna mitzvah was clear what you need to read. Mikra Megillah is the same. Parsha Zohar the same. I think the mitzvah to say Hallel and what to say 2 different times, and therefore Mistavet Fei. It's like Tefillah, Berachas Hamazon, and even if you skip the word, you don't need to say Hallel again. And this brings us to the Machlokes Rambam and Ramban Shoresh Aleph in the Shroshei HaHagdoma to Sefer HaMitzvahs. So the Rambam brings the Alochas Gedolos. Alochas Gedolos paskins, he doesn't paskin. Alochas Gedolos counts Hallel in the minyan of Taryag. And the Rambam understands the Alochas Gedolos. This proves that according to the Baal Alochas Gedolos, HaRav Yehudai Goin, Hallel is a mitzvah d'oraisa. And the Rambam wonders, how could a mitzvah d'oraisa be to say Pirkei Tehillim that came at a much later stage in history? So how could it be a mitzvah d'oraisa to say Tehillim? That's the argument of the Rambam. So the Ramban has a 2-pronged approach. Number one, the Ramban says, derech habahag limno is gam mitzvahs derabonon. The Hag includes a minyan atariag some mitzvahs derabonon. So we cannot prove from the Hag that his opinion is that Hallel is a dioraisa. But the Ramban also says Hallel could be a dioraisa. V'afar piken, the mitzvah min HaTorah is lahallel, lahoidois. David the Melech was metaken pirkei HaHallel. If not for the Ramban, I would say no. David Melech said Tehillim. It is Anshe Knesset Agdoyle, thousands of years later, that said those Pirkei Tehillim are all about the praise of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and therefore that would be the mitzvah of Hallel. So I try to explain why L'shitose, even in Svora Mistavret Vei, that a word or two words are not me'akev b'di eved, kach nere boror v'poshut. So first I proved my point from the tool. We brought the Magen Avraham, and I did explain both different ashkofas, why each of them, L'kesh Atzmai, would be valid, but I do lean far more strongly to what seems to me to be a Raya Meforeshes from the Tur, the Rosh and Maram Rutenburg, that if you skip a word, you are Yoitze Yedei Choyve, and words would not be Me'akev. Who am I even to think about being Choylek on the Mishnah Brura? But I feel this very, very strongly. V'ma ma'oid sumachti. When I found that Tana de Masieli and the Pri Megadim, Tov Peches, Mishbet Seizov, Sif Koten Aleph, clearly says that if you skipped a word in Hallel, you were Yoitze Yedei Choyvosoi B'di'eved. And it is interesting that Mishnah Brura doesn't quote the Pri Megadim, but the Pri Megadim is clear. One is Yoitze B'di'eved, even if he skipped a word of Hallel. Now the Mishnah Brura, his entire case is based. The Gemara is Medama Hallel to Megillah. But in reality, the Gemara is not Medama Hallel to Megillah, only in the din of Koire Limafreya. So why would we assume that Hallel is similar to Megillah also if you skip a word? I just explained what is the difference between Kriyas Megillah and Hallel. Kriyas Megillah is Kriya, and the Megillah is clearly defined. Hallel is different. The mitzvah is Lahoidus or Hallel. And the mitzvah came far before the Takana, which proclaimed Eich Lahoidus or Hallel HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And therefore I think they're not the same. But I have a big pel on the Mishnah Brura. He writes that in Megillah Yud Zayin is more that Hallel has the same halachas as Megillah. The Mishnah speaks only about Megillah, according to Mefreya Layotz. And the Gemara says, V'chein b'Hallel, v'chein b'Kriyas, v'chein b'Tfilah. So if Chazal compare Hallel to Megillah, they also compare Tfilah to Megillah. And by Tfilah it's clear that skipping a word is not Ma'akev. You are Yoitz even if you skipped a word. So what is the difference between V'chein b'Hallel and V'chein b'Tfilah? This proves beyond doubt that the only comparison and dimion between Hallel and Megillah is only Lagabe Kodesh Mafreya. And that is the common denominator between Megillah and Hallel and Kriya Shema and Tfilah. In all these mitzvahs, Kodesh Mafreya lo yotzo, but they're not similar. They do not have the same din regarding Chiser Teva Achas. Because by Tfilah it's clear that he's Yoitze. By Kriya Shema it's clear that he's not Yoitze. Hallel, somewhere in between, and in my opinion, you are Yoitze. And that is what the Mishbet Seizov, the Pri Megadim, clearly says in Sif Koten Aleph, as I quoted. So what would be my Psak Halacha L'Maisa? I would say, Yesh Lahachmer Kedif Mishnah Brura, you need to say Hallel again, but without a bracha, because Sofek brachas lekula. And this brings us to question number 2 in today's shir. Twice in Shulchan Aruch Kuf Pei Zayin, and once again Tuf Reish Pei Beis, we find in the Ramah. If a person forgot to say Hallel and Berachas Hamazon, when it comes to the whole Rachamons, he should say, Hu Rachamon Hu Yaselin and Nusim and Afrois Kashem Shashis Ravaseni, Beyom Amayim Bezman Azeh, Beyamayim Matesiwa Bin Yochin Koigol Chashmeno Avonav. B'chor Shor, that's the great Tevuah Shor. B'chor Shor Shabbos Chofal of Wonders. How do we daven HaKadosh Baruch Hu should make nisim? It's against the Gemara and Brochas Daf Samach. So the Mishnah says, "Oy mehiros and shetele dishti zochor harei zeh tfilas shav." The Gemara asks, "Why is it a tfilas shav?" It happened at least once in history. Leah had her seventh child, Shinu Baruch HaKodesh. It is one of the Shvotim, and she pleaded with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. She doesn't want to hurt Rachel's feelings anymore, and the Zohar was nefach in a cave, and that is how Dinah came to be. So the Gemara asks, it's possible, it happened once, so why not daven? Ein maskirin ma'aseh nisim. We don't daven for miracles. So ask the B'chor Shor, how could you say, Rachamon, hu yaseh lanu nisim v'neflois? I do not recall whether this is the Tevuah Shor, but some of the great Acharonim differentiate between an S that is above and beyond the realm of natural phenomena, of laws of nature, like Kriyas Yamsuf, like so many other Nisim, Bach Hashemen. And these Nisim we don't mispal, we don't daven. Ein maskir nasa Nisim. That a fetus started off as a Zocha and then he became an Akeva the other way around, that's an ace. That is something we can't explain in biology. And in an ace of that nature, we're not mispalal. But Rabban B'Yamatim, Geborim B'Yad Chaloshim, is unlikely, it's uncommon, but it could happen. It's not supernatural phenomena. And in that nace, we could be mispalal. Yeshua's Yankev, Tofresh Pei Beis, has a different interpretation, with a touch of pilpul, because Yeshua's Yankov was a big mefalpul. And he says the difference is between an Eshel Yochid and an Eshel Rabbi. And why is that? When a person is zeichet to a miracle, menaken loy mizchu yosov, it has a price. It has a price. So if it's an Eshel Yochid, why lose out schar mitzvah? That is the reason ein maskir and mas and nisim. But if it's an Eshel Nasel Rabbi, and people will be inspired, people will see the miracle, people will start believing in Hashem, Yotzef Seiroi B'Schodoi. On one hand, Menachem L'Mischoi, on the other hand, Schodoi Harbe Miyoid, in the merit of the Kiddush Hashem that he is doing. And therefore, it's like a trade-off. Hava Machashav Hefsed Mitzvah Keneged, Hefsed Aveira Keneged Mitzvah. And therefore, you lose on one hand, but you're getting on the other hand, and that is why we could be mispala for an Eshel Rabbi. So let me share with you my opinion and my thought about this kasha, and I really think kushim ikora leiso. There is a difference between a personal miracle, a personal nace, which one should not daven for. But when we daven, שהקדוש ברוך הוא יעשה לנו ניסים כשם שהוסיסו לאבותינו ביום המים בזמן הזה. Those that were miracles that proved to the entire world, Hashem hu Elokim. Those are the miracles that we are to remember, and we should never forget for a moment. We have a mitzvah of Schias Yetzias Mitzrayim every day of the year, morning and evening, and once a year we have the mitzvah of Sipi Yetzias Mitzrayim. We are to remember the Nisim of Chanukah and Purim. And in Yemei Chanukah and Purim, we thank HaKadosh Baruch Hu for these Nisim. These Nisim brought about Kiddush Shem Shemayim Ba'olamoi, and that is Tachlis Abriya. We daven every day, many times every day. Yizgadel v'yizgadesh Amerabo. I'm an oval, and I say 15 Kedeshim every day, and more than that. So, Nisim Kishem Shenasel Avasein, of course we ask for, and we should ask for, because every Jew hopes and prays and aspires and dreams about a world in which V'simloch ato la'olam voed, a world in which HaKadosh Baruch Hu is king, a world in which everyone ki ayin ba'ayin yiru, and everybody should recognize Malchus Shomayim. So when we daven Urachamonu Yasalonu Nisim v'neflois Keshem she'osisu l'avoseinu, of course we daven she is gadel v'yiskadei shemei rabu, and that's the tachlis of all the nisim. 1,000 times I spoke about the Ramban at the end of Parshas Boy, when the Ramban comes to explain why is it important that we remember Yetzias Mitzrayim, and the Ramban writes, מן הניסים הגדולים והמפורסמים עוד המועד בניסים הנסתוריים שהם יסוד כל התורה כולו, שאין לנו חלק בתורס מוישה עד שנדע שכל דבורנו ומקרנו הם ניסים, אין בהם טבע ומנהגו של עולם. We need to recognize that the greatest nace is nature. הניסים הנסתוריים. הניסחו ונפרסחו שבכל יום אימונו, ערב ובוקר וצהריים. Those are the greatest nisim. And that's the reason why HaKadosh Baruch Hu B'chlal performed supernatural nisim, miraculous events that we are to remember throughout the ages. We should appreciate the concealed nisim. Nisim hanistorim. Shehem yisod kol haTorah kulo. What is an ace? In Tanakh, an ace usually is a banner, a flag. Kinsoneis horim teruach eskoya shoifa tishmo, v'soneis lekabetz guli yoseinu. But in popular Lashon Kodesh, and also in our tefillas, an ace is supernatural phenomena, a miracle. Ala nisim va'ala niflois. Niflois heim nisim. And many years ago I explained, these two pshotim, these two interpretations are not two sides of the same coin. Shnayim shehem echod. Every nace is a degel, is a banner, is a flag. What do people do with flags? A flag symbolizes sovereignty, control. Each and every one of the nations represented in the United Nations has a unique flag. No two countries have the same flag. Lahavdil elef alfi avdolos. The Shavotim, each Shevet, Yud Bei Shvotim, had a degel, had a flag. And where do you put that flag? On the highest turret. The flag flies on governmental buildings. On the fortress, the flag cries out to the world, Yesh Manek Lebira. Who is king? Who is in control? All the miracles are degolim, they're flags, and the miracles signify, and call out to the world, Yesh Manek Lebira. HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Hashem, Hu Elokim, Takaf Bal Yecholes, Ubal Akochot Kulam. So the two interpretations in an ace are the same. So the Beis Yosef has a very famous kasha. Why do you have 8 days of Hanukkah when the ace was 7 days? 1 day is nature. There was enough oil for 1 day. The miracle was the other 7 days. So why do we have 8 days Hanukkah? Hundreds of tirutzim were presented and discussed regarding this kasha of the Beis Yosef. The one I am most fond of is, yes, 7 days of miracle, 8 days of Hanukkah. Because when you light 7 days, we hope that you realize that the 8th day is also a miracle. It is the greatest miracle, the miracle of Teva. So towards the end of Masechet Talis, the Gemara tells a story about Reb Chanina ben Doisa. His daughter wants to light Ner Shabbos. It's not working. Candles don't light. And then she realizes, to her dismay, to her horror, that it's not shemen, it's not oil, it's vinegar. And that's why The fire isn't catching on. And she cries to her father, and Reb Chanina Mendoza says, Biti ma ich beslach, Misho mal Hashem is v'yadlik, Yoim el Chaim is v'yadlik. And everybody talks about the miracle. By Reb Chanina Mendoza, miracles were commonplace. Interesting phenomenon in the entire Shas, Shishas in the Mishnah. There's not even one halachic statement by Reb Chanina Mendoza. All we know about Reb Chanina Mendoza is miracles. He was the Baal Shem Tov of Tkufis HaMishnah. So the Chiddush is not the miracle. I think we need to observe and think about, what is he saying? What are the words? Biti ma ich paslach. What do you care, my dear daughter? Don't cry. Don't be sad. Misham Hashem ziyadlik. But probably Reb Chanina Mendoza's daughter, if she learned the Meisankim and she knew anything about science, probably she said, Aval Abba, they're not the same. Shemen is inflammable. Vinegar, chomis, is not. Reb Chanina Mendoza knows that. But what he means to say is, why is oil inflammable and vinegar is not? Because that's the way Kodesh Baruch Hu wanted it. So I think right now HaKadosh Baruch Hu will agree that chometz should also be inflammable. We need to light Ner Shabbos. And that is exactly what happened. So we all are aware that there's a system to the world and there are laws of nature. I think that Ramban knew that as well. That Ramban was not only the Gadol Hador, he was a very worldly scholar. He was aware of the sciences. And the Rambam definitely was. He was the greatest physician and the greatest philosopher of his era. And the Rambam writes in Yud Gimel Ikrim, Ani Mamin B'Emunah Shalem Shaboyris Baruch Shamoy. The Rambam definitely wasn't a battling. So the Pashut reality is, yes, there are laws of nature, but who devised the laws of nature? Who put them into place? It is only HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Ba'omek ha'devarim, b'pnimiyus ha'devarim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu alone, He alone controls everything. And I say HaKadosh Baruch Hu could create 1,000,000 worlds, and each of these 1,000,000 worlds has its own unique, different set of physics, of chemistry, of biology, of hydrodynamics, and everything in between. And He could create 1,000,000 worlds which would be totally spontaneous, without any determinism, without any laws. Sunday, the sun will rise in the east and go down in the west. Monday, it'll rise in the south and go down in the south. And a day later, it'll rise in the west and go down in the north. Spontaneous worlds, unpredictable. Everything is biyad Hashem. There are laws of nature, but the one that controls the laws, the one that dictates the way the world ticks and works, is HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And that is why He performed this, and we should be aware of that. And that is why we have 8 days of Hanukkah and not 7. 7 for the 7 days that were miraculous, 8 for the 8th day that was natural. Naturally miraculous. Miraculously natural. And that is the Nes of Teva. B'nei vino yemei shemoinu kavu shir eranonim. It is only the people of wisdom, insight, and understanding. They were the ones, Yemei Shemoino Kavo Shir Irenonim. So let us hope, Bekoroiv B'Yameinu. Yes, we should see. Menanisim Hagedolim V'Hamifrosomim. Odamoide Benisim Hanastorim. We should see, Bekoroiv, the Nes of Bias Mashiach Tzidkenu. We should see Bekor of the Kohen Gadol, Meitu v'madlakas haneres, b'menores amor, b'beis hamikdash, shi'abona, b'bias goyel tzedek, b'mheru v'yomeinu, amen.